Welcome to the American Citizens Abroad podcast. I'm Michelle, and today I'm chatting with ACA's Executive Director, Marylouise Serrato. Hi, Marylouise. Thanks for chatting with us today.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for inviting me on.
Could you give us an update on what's going on in Washington, D.C. with tax legislation?
A lot is going on with tax legislation. If you've been following ACA and following the news and some of the reporting that we've been putting out there, you probably know that Congressman LaHood introduced in the last Congress, the 118th Congress, he introduced the Residence-Based Taxation for Americans Abroad Act. So this is a piece of legislation that calls for taxing Americans who are living and working overseas on a residence-based regime. Most of your listeners probably know the differences between residence-based and citizenship-based taxation, but I'll give just a quick overview. Currently, the United States taxes U.S. citizens based on their citizenship. So no matter where you live and no matter where you are earning income, whether it's foreign income or U.S. income, you are taxed based on your citizenship. And residence-based taxation taxes a U.S. citizen based on where the income is earned. If it is foreign income and is taxable in a foreign jurisdiction, it is not taxable to the U.S. Treasury. And if it is income that is earned or in relation to economic activity in the United States, then it is taxable to the U.S. Treasury, even if the person is living outside of the United States. So that's the big news on the tax legislation. We're hoping that the legislation will be reintroduced soon into the new 119th Congress. And we're working here in Washington, D.C. to help move that along.
We know that President Trump made a promise to end double taxation for U.S. citizens overseas. What does that mean?
That's a good question. We don't know exactly what President Trump had in mind when he said end double taxation. However, clearly Congressman LaHood, who has introduced the residence-based taxation legislation, has interpreted it to mean a move towards residence-based taxation. And we are understanding, or at least interpreting, the promise to be a move in that direction.
Could you tell us more about the Residence-Based Taxation for Americans Abroad Act that was introduced in the last Congress?
Happy to talk a little bit about the details of the legislation. The legislation, like I mentioned before, would move U.S. citizens away from a citizenship-based model of taxation to a residence-based model of taxation. Essentially, a U.S. citizen who is living overseas would no longer have to file a tax return for his foreign earned income. And that would be pension income, it could be salary income. As long as it's foreign earned, it would not be reportable to the U.S. Treasury. Again, as I mentioned before, income that is earned in the United States would remain taxable to the U.S. Treasury. So, for example, if a U.S. citizen who's living overseas is earning investment income, rental income in the United States, U.S. Social Security, pension income, that would continue to be taxable in the United States. So a lot of the contours of Congressman LaHood's bill do mirror the modeling that ACA has done back in, I believe, 2016. We published a side-by-side comparative. And what that side-by-side comparative said, where in the current tax code do you have to carve in to get to residence-based taxation? So a lot of what's in the LaHood bill looks like the ACA modeling. ACA has recommended taking the tax rules for non-resident aliens and applying those to U.S. citizens living and working overseas. The LaHood bill grandfathers in people who have been overseas for 3 of the last 5 years before they can opt into residence-based taxation. That's another key element of the LaHood legislation. It's optional. Some people may want to opt into residence-based taxation, but some people who are on short-term assignments may not. And so the legislation is optional. There is also a threshold for people at a certain income and wealth level that would have to, quote unquote, pay to play in order to get into residence-based taxation. And the LaHood bill currently has that individuals who have an estate valued at 13.6 million or whatever the current estate tax threshold is. Those are some of the basics of the LaHood legislation. ACA on our website, we've done a side-by-side that takes a look at the LaHood legislation and outlines a lot of the elements. We've also done a technical explanation of the bill, so you can read through that and see a lot of the more specific points of the legislation.
And where does the legislation stand today? What are the next steps?
Right now, the offices are looking at refinements. The legislation has obviously been with Congressman LaHood's office. Committee staff is also taking a look at the bill. They will probably be working on getting a score. This usually goes through the Joint Committee of Taxation. And what that means is that they want to get a number to determine the revenue estimate. How much will this legislation cost? In ACA's modeling, we've been able to get at a revenue neutral number, and that means that it would not cost the US Treasury any loss in revenue. Some of the modeling that ACA has in our modeling for our BT is not in the LaHood bill. So they were probably taking a look at recommendations from ourselves, from other groups, and obviously from individuals. So fingers crossed, hopefully the legislation with refinements will get a good revenue score and they will be able to reintroduce it into this Congress.
What is ACA's prediction for getting RBT legislation passed in Congress?
Well, that's a really good question. I wish I had a crystal ball and I could tell you with, 99% certainty what's going to happen. Our feeling, though, is that we are on a very positive track with the legislation. A few reasons for this. Number one, we have obviously support from the administration. Pretty bold statement was made about doing something for US citizens living overseas with regards to taxation. We have the interest of Congressman LaHood's office, who has gone out and actually drafted the legislation. There are other efforts, previous efforts in Congress for legislation to address the problems of Americans living and working overseas. So there is good awareness. There are other offices that Congressman LaHood can also reach out to. And another very big important thing that's going on is that tax legislation in general is on the agenda for the Congress. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or TCJA, the provisions in that legislation will be expiring at the end of this year. So Congress definitely has to go in there and work on that legislation. And this is a golden opportunity for residence-based taxation legislation to be rolled into that entire discussion. A lot of you have heard probably in the news media that there's a desire to do one big reconciliation bill. There's some talk about, will there be two bills? Well, will Congress address immigration first and taxation later? So some of those things are still not worked out, but definitely this is the year for tax reform. And this is the year that residence-based taxation has very good chance of getting rolled into that and passed into legislation.
What is ACA's strategy to help get RBT across the finish line?
So our strategy, as many of you know, we're here in Washington, D.C., so we're very available to the Congress and to the tax writing committees. We have really good relationships up on Capitol Hill with many of the champions of the community, many of the offices that have already gone out and written legislation to address some of these problems. We are working on making more contacts into Congress. There are a lot of new members of Congress that need to be educated. We're going into those offices. We're going back into the offices where we're well known. We've already met with Congressman LaHood's office. We will be going back in and meeting with the U.S. Treasury, meeting with the Joint Committee on Taxation, with the tax writing committees, both on the House and on the Senate side, because it'd be important also to have a companion bill on the Senate side. We believe that there's work being done right now on a companion bill on the Senate side. So we're going to be doing that. We're also going to continue to raise awareness through the media. Many of you have probably seen that ACA is getting picked up in a wide variety of media resources, and especially some of the important media outlets like Tax Notes and Tax Analysts. These are the publications that the congressional offices that are working on tax reform are reading on a daily basis. So it's really important to have ACA quoted in a lot of those articles. So we're going to be doing a lot of work up on Capitol Hill. I'm going to be doing a lot of work up on Capitol Hill. We'll also be deepening our relationship with stakeholders. There are a lot of other groups in Washington, D.C. that are interested in tax reform, and we're going to be reaching out to the stakeholders and partners that we already work with and expanding our network. We're also going to be using the RBT Coalition. This is a coalition that was created a few years ago of organizations, not just organizations representing U.S. citizens overseas, but AmChams and other organizations who understand that residence-based taxation is just good tax policy. So we're going to be using all the tools in our toolbox to get RBT legislation across the finish line.
How can the public help?
You can help by, number one, becoming a member of ACA. It's really important that an organization like ACA, which is based in Washington, D.C., available 24/7 to the Congress, nonprofit, nonpartisan, that is really key because we can work both sides of the aisle. So really supporting the work of ACA is probably the first thing you can do. Support our advocacy campaigns. We have campaigns online where you can engage directly with your representative in Congress. You can also engage with the leadership on some of the tax committees, like the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. And these campaigns really do work. When you do the write-in campaign and ACA follows up in an office, it's really beneficial because they've already heard from someone in their district or they've heard from an individual about the issue. And so it sort of prepaves the path. Let people also know, share our content, let people know about ACA, let people know about Congressman LaHood's legislation, share our content on social media if you're out on social media, get on our mailing list, share our newsletters, share our communications, get the word out because it's really important to get out to the community and understand that this is a golden opportunity for ACA and for the community, and that we need community support, whether that's through being a member of ACA, whether that's sharing our content, whether that's donating to the organization, or simply just letting your network know about what's going on in Washington, D.C., and about our work to support it.
Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
No, I think we've covered everything, but if people are interested in learning more, definitely visit our website. And I think Michelle will put up an email address where you can contact ACA. If you have any questions, shoot us out an email, check our website, take a look at the technical explanation that we have posted and the side-by-side comparative and also the draft legislation. Let us know what you think and just keep in touch.
Thanks for taking the time to chat today.
Thanks, Michelle.